I really could have spent a lot more time with these lemurs. They are so interesting and clever and surprising. And I came back after all the photographing all the different types of lemurs, and I wound up with images that were a combination of very well exposed and this, which is not great in terms of exposure. In a situation like this, where you're just responding to what's in front of you, you are not to bring additional light. I certainly could use a reflector, and I can't choose the way the animals are facing. So when I photographed this image to be as neutral as possible, in that I wanted to make sure I preserved the highlights in the shots. They weren't blown out, that white patch, but also brighten up the front part of the face as much as possible so you could see those eyes and that adorable tongue and some of the more striking features. So I was able to kind of be able to expose for that. But when I jump in here to On One Photo Raw 2020 with that image, I'm able to see a lot more options ahead of me. And one of the things is being able to choose between the develop, the effects, the portrait mode. Sorry, just flipping through these. Um, but uh, but in terms of this, I almost always dive into effects, portrait, and local, and I just kind of start with develop. But I want to show a couple things that you can do in the develop mode in the software that can be surprisingly comprehensive. You don't really have to dig anywhere else unless you really, really want to. So on this image, what I would do is I would start with having the automatic adjustments made for me in terms of all the tones and the all the points, the midpoints, the highlights, the shadows, etc. And by just clicking that alone, I bring back some great depth to the image. And now I can just keep dialing down and playing a little bit more with that. So in this image, I mentioned that I didn't have the fill light I would have loved to have had in this experience, simply because of the restrictions about being around with the animals. But what I can do is open up the shadows this way and see a really big difference. Look specifically on that front fur, the face, around the eyes. That opens things up quite a bit. I can say I want a little bit more in the midtones too, and I see some response to that as well. And I can say, okay, even though that's great, I want to make sure I manage the highlights. I bring down the bright parts of the image, and then I also bring down the dark parts of the image, kind of again building in that depth. And then I'll come back here and look at what I want to raise, and I think I want to make sure I have a little more shadows. And so without doing much more, I'm going from here where I am to what I started with. And every time I do this, I work through post-processing and I get kind of lost in it, especially when it's been for a while. If I'm creating something just that I really want to create, I'm always find it very jarring to go back to the before compared to where I am now. And I think this image really presents that quite well. I'm going to go ahead and crop this image a little bit, kind of pull down the edges to be able to change where the orientation of the image is focused, but also to be able to rotate the image as I prefer. And I could keep going with this one for quite a while, but probably the only other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over into effects and bring up the curves. The curves module is one of my favorites in effects. I could just bring it up just a little bit here and then just add a little bit of a vignette to this right here in the effects. Click vignette, choose one of my favorites, which is a big feathery kind of vignette. And that's it. That's where I am now, and that's what I started with. So pretty big difference.